Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Concluding the hearing in the Triple Talaq case, the Supreme Court today reserved its judgment. The Apex Court was hearing a batch of petitions challenging the constitutional validity of the instant divorce practice. The court has been holding daily hearings in the case since May 11th. However, underlying the Triple Talaq questions are deeper issues about the nature of constitutional law in India. This case has caused a great deal of judicial confusion over the years. It has also produced deep distortions in our politics. India has a diverse culture which creates hurdles. Since the existence of diversity is to such a grave extreme in our country, the occurrence of conflicts cannot be a matter of surprise. When it comes to laws in India, other than the basic difference of statutory laws and procedural laws, there are personal laws as well. Personal laws are those laws which are governed explicitly in matters relating to family affairs, marriage, divorce, succession, etc. There is Christian law, Muslim law, Hindu law and Parsi law as well. It is in this context that we analyze our topic today, religious beliefs versus constitutional morality. Joining me on the program today are Vinod Sharma, political editor of the Hindustan Times, J. Sai Deepak, advocate of the Delhi High Court, Satya Prakash, legal editor of the Tribune, and we'll be joined on the phone line by Justice B.A. Khan, former Chief Justice of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Satya Prakash, I'd like to begin with you. Of course, religious beliefs versus constitutional morality. What are the challenges really?
Well, basically, currently, only the Triple Talaq, and that too the instant form, is under challenge before the Supreme Court, because at the very outset the Supreme Court clarified that we are not going to get into polygamy and the practice of nikah halala. Before that, when the matter was referred to the Constitution Bench, the court clarified that we are not going to get into the Uniform Civil Code, which is currently being examined by the Law Commission of India. So what the court is examining, or rather it has examined now and they have reserved the verdict, is the practice of Triple Talaq, and that to instant form, like talaq, 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 and the marriage is over. That form of talaq practiced among Muslims in India. And the real question was, because most of the petitioners before the Supreme Court, they were all either Muslim women individuals or Muslim women organizations, and they have challenged it mainly on the ground that it violates their right to equality under Article 14 of the Constitution, right to non-discrimination under Article 15 of the Constitution, and right to live with human dignity. That is implicit in Article 21, which guarantees right to life and liberty to every individual. So these three main grounds, and they challenged it. From the other side, the two main rather respondents were All India Muslim Personal Law Board, which became an in this matter, and then Jamiat Ulama-e-Hind, and a couple of other organizations and individuals, including Mr. Salman Khurshid, who requested the court that I should be heard in this matter, and the court agreed, and he also argued in the matter. The real issue from the other side was that this forms part of our belief, our faith, and they went to the extent of saying that Lord Ram was born at Ayodhya, so nobody can question it. So I found it slightly interesting because it has implications for the Ayodhya case.
Yes.
But this is part of my belief, and that too for the last 1400 years, Muslims, they have been practicing this. Can it be challenged, and that too on the ground of fundamental rights? Because real question, technically, if you frame it in legal language, there is one Article 13. 13.3 defines what is law, and what is law. There is a restriction on the state under Article 13.2 that you will not make any law that violates fundamental rights of individuals.
Yes, sure.
And second leg of argument is that right to practice your own personal law, it is derived from your Article 25, that is right to religion.
Yes.
And right to religion is subject to all other fundamental rights, also to morality, health and public order. So if that is so, then by implication right to personal law becomes subject to all other fundamental rights, and hence it cannot violate right to equality of Muslim women. Sure. That was the crux of the argument, and both the sides, they argued pretty well, and how the court decides the matter And the CJI said we are trying to walk on a razor's edge. So it's very difficult to decide this way because there are certain sensibilities involved. At the same time, it also involves fundamental rights of millions of Muslim women. So court has to do a balancing act and trying to strike a balance between right to religion and their right to practice their own personal law,
Sure.
and the Muslim woman's right to fundamental rights, fundamental right to equality, non-discrimination, and rightly the Attorney General pointed out that this should not be perceived as a majority versus minority discourse.
Yes.
And the petitioners also, Muslim Women Personal Law Board today clarified that we have anything against, if we have, it is against the Muslim men of our own community, and particularly the clergymen.
Okay. I'm going to take the point that you're making of religious beliefs forward. Mr. Sharma, can religious beliefs really trump modern constitutional morality?
Yeah, there are two things I want to say. One most telling comment in the course of the proceedings came from Mr. Ram Jethmalani, who was representing the petitioners. And he said that all religious doctrine, secularism means that all religious doctrine has to subjugate itself to the rule of law. And I think that almost sums up the case, that there has to be rule of law applied. Triple talaq isn't integral to the faith. It is a practice that has been followed. And even this following of practice has been a bit of an aberration, because the practice as originally prescribed is that you have to talaq thrice with interregnums in order to be able to reflect on the decision that you're taking, which is a more scientific way of doing it, which is a better way of doing it. And even when a Hindu man and a Hindu wife want to separate, the courts ask them when they go for divorce that give each other some chance, some benefit or doubt, reflect on it more and come back to us if you're still convinced that you want to separate, So triple talaq indeed is a retrograde practice. It is humiliation of the women. But, Satya said that the court wants to keep itself on the issue of triple talaq. Initially, it said so. But in the course of the proceedings, there was an exchange between the Attorney General and the judges, where the nikah halala and the polygamy were also raised, to which the court said that they can't be taking 3 wickets in one ball, to which the Attorney General said that you can break all the 3 wickets in one ball, which means that the other 2 issues may also come up before the court once they have taken a position on triple talaq. And may I tell you one thing, that nikah halala is more brutal than triple talaq. Nikah halala is that a divorced woman can marry again, has to marry again if she wants to go to her original husband. She has to marry a third person.
Yes.
And before she can go to her first husband, the third person she marries has also to divorce her. So look at the trauma a woman has to face who has been divorced by virtue of triple talaq, but who is sought to be taken back by her husband, but she has to take a detour, which is a humiliating detour,
Sure.
through a third person back to her original husband. There is a serious case. The demand has arisen from within the community. Some liberated, forward-looking women have come up with this petition. But at the same time, there is this question that it all is happening in a time when the minorities are not very comfortable with certain policies of the government. So there is a political aspect to it. The court is not expected to go into the political aspect. It will stick to the points of law that are presented before it. It has reserved the judgment. Today, in fact, there was a suggestion, there was a question by the court to the lawyer of All India Muslim Personal Law Board, Mr. Kapil Sibal, where they asked him that whether, that there could be in the nikah nama, there is a nikah nama,
Yes,
which is
yes.
drafted, whether it could be women can insist on stating in the nikah nama that if a triple talaq is given to them, they will not accept it. whether that is possible. This question was asked yesterday, which was answered today by the All India Muslim Personal Law Board. Yes, such an advisory can go out from the clergy to the community, but the nature of it won't be binding.
Sure.
Now, I think that if a beginning has been made, then the nature of it can also be made binding if the community leaders or the religious leaders of the community are really interested in sorting this issue out to the satisfaction of the petitioners and also in the modern times.
Indeed. All right. Let me get in Justice B.A. Khan into the picture now. Justice Khan, you know, what is the constitutionality really as far as personal laws are concerned?
Well, Frank, I find a lot of confusion in the whole thing because there is a misunderstanding about the triple talaq as formulated by Quran. And the second triple talaq, which is commonly talked about, which is called talaq-e-bidat, which finds place.
There seems to be
in
some problem with the line,
the
Justice Khan. We can't really hear you too well, so we'll try and reconnect with you and get that line sorted out and then speak to you. In the meantime, let me bring in J. Sai Deepak as well. Should personal laws of religions be beyond the scope of judicial review?
I don't think so. And I don't think any law or anything that falls within the definition of law under Article 13 can ever be beyond the scope of judicial review at all. See, there are at least 3 layers of Article 25 that we have to consider, but before that I have to make a comment. The query from the Supreme Court as to whether the community will be acceptable, if at all an option is inserted in the Nikahnaama itself, I think is problematic for a different reason. If you arrive at the conclusion that what is being infracted and infringed upon is a fundamental right, then there is no question of a person having the right to waive their own fundamental rights. This is another aspect that needs to be looked into, because fundamental rights are seen as inalienable and can only be subject to restrictions which are provided for in the Constitution by the state. So this question itself for me is surprising, and this is for me a concerning trend, a trend of concern for the simple reason that I think the Supreme Court should try and decide what is within its domain, as opposed to throwing each of these questions back to the community itself for the fear of some kind of backlash or whatever it may be. Because I think that was one of the submissions made on behalf of the Personal Law Board today, that if we go down this path of inquiry, there could be backlash. So what? The court is expected to perform its duty regardless of what the popular opinion may be within the framework of the law. So today, if we say that this is happening under the dispensation of a certain government, what happened with Shah Banu was under the dispensation of a different government altogether. There was a backlash even then. So backlash may or may not come, should never concern the court at all. The court should only concern itself with 2 questions. Only one question is what is taking place within the boundaries of the Constitution. Does the Constitution empower the Supreme Court to look into this particular issue? If so, in what manner is the intervention permitted? These are the only questions. See, if the rights fall under 25(1), as he rightly said, it is subject to Part 3, public order, morality, health, and so on and so forth. Under 25(2), dehors the power of the Supreme Court to interfere through Article 142, as it did in the Vishakha Guidelines case. It is possible for the state to introduce such a legislation using its reformative levers under 25(2). This is what it has done with respect to the rights of the Hindu community and other communities. This has happened. Now, if the government had done so, then perhaps there could have been political issues that are raised. But here, you have a bunch of liberated progressive women from within the community approaching the court saying, kindly look into this. And now, if the Supreme Court is also expected to look into political issues, then which forum will we be left with which is devoid of any political consideration, so that it applies the law and upholds the rule of law? So as far as I'm concerned, there is no personal law which is ever outside the scope of judicial review. However, there is one caveat. We must a fair bit of caution and circumspection, and perhaps invite opinions from people who are well versed with those aspects of personal laws. For instance, it's impossible for one person, regardless of how brilliant he may be, to understand Parsi law, Hindu law, Muslim law, so on and so forth, or even Christian law. And even within each of these laws, there are sub-laws which apply to each of these denominations. So an informed call is necessary, but ultimately the call has to be taken by the Supreme Court, and there is no two ways about it as far as I'm concerned.
Sure, that's a very valid point that you're making. I think we're rejoined by Justice B.A. Khan. Justice Khan, if you can hear me, please go ahead, make the point that you are making.
Yeah, Frank, I was telling you that there is a lot of confusion about this triple talaq You have we have two types of triple talaq. One is as is ordained by the Quran, and the other is the instant triple talaq, which finds place in this personal law thing. Now, actually, the one formulated in the Quran is the most humane situation which is provided in case of a deteriorating marital relationship. Now, that provides for 3 stages. It's not instant that you say talaq, 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 and you are gone. That those 3 stages provide time gaps. Now, those time gaps are there provided to give opportunity to the couple to be reconciled. Now, in case, for example, first once there is a first declaration, then there is a 90-day gap. I'm not sure about the time. In that 90-day gap, they can go to any of their elderly relations or some kind of an arbitrator and vent out their differences and then find scope, whether there is a scope for reconciliation. If within that time period it doesn't come off, then there is a second declaration following. In that second declaration, there is again a time gap of some days. I don't exactly remember the days. That same exercise is repeated. If after that gap, it is reported back that it has become irretrievable, then the third declaration is made, that is called triple talaq. Now, that third, it has all the safeguards. And it's like our irretrievable breakdown in a marriage as we see in our common law here. Now, once after third attempt you also fail, then this third declaration of talaq becomes irrevocable. Now, this instant talaq or a unilateral talaq, which is talaq, 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 is a misuse and a distortion of the formulation as it is in the Quran. Now, that misuse has taken place after Prophet's death, and it has taken place, that distortion, to please some that time those monarchs or whatever the case was, that so that they can go on changing wives at the drop of the hat. Now, that misuse doesn't mean that the provision is bad. Now, what is being commonly talked is what? Triple talaq, this is a practice, one way, triple talaq, that's all. What is Supreme Court seized of? Is Supreme Court seized of a formulation in the Quran, in Surah Nisa? I can give you the verses if you so want. If it is so, then it is fundamental to the Islamic religion. If it is fundamental to the Islamic religion, it is protected by Article 25 of the Constitution, then there is no question of a court striking it down or touching it or whatever.
Okay.
But if Supreme Court is not dealing with that, if it is dealing with some kind of a practice, then it will be confronted by a judgment of the Bombay High Court rendered years back.
In 1952, yes.
Chakla judge said that court has no jurisdiction to deal with a practice arising out of a personal law. And after that, we had an Aga Khan judgment and
Okay.
this judgment. And that
I'm going to come back to you because Jay Sai Deepak does not agree with what you're saying.
Yes.
But the court did rule.
May I just make this
yes.
point? And this is very important. He may be right, Justice Khan may be absolutely right in saying that this practice, what we see today, is an aberration. Let's take the worst case possible and let's take the bull by its horns. Assume for a moment that this is not an aberration and this is indeed something that has a scriptural basis and is an essential part of the religion. That is when you test the limits of the constitution powers of the Supreme Court in terms of its intervention. Assume for a moment that a particular religion says that the punishment for adultery is stoning, and this is an essential aspect of our religion as far as retaining the sanctity of marriage is concerned. And it is established that it has a scriptural basis and there is no distortion over a point of time. Is the Supreme Court expected to sit back and is the Indian state expected to sit back and endorse this kind of practice in the name of Article 25(1)? No, I'm so sorry. Article 25(1) starts with a contingent clause which clearly says subject to Part 3, public morality, order, so on and so forth. Therefore, you have your religious rights, but it comes with a rider which begins with that particular rider. Second, the state has the power to deal with it. Therefore, I don't think we should go down that path of stripping the state of any power to deal with any of these practices. The state does have the power to deal with any practice. However, there's a caveat. The Supreme Court has also said let's not reform a religion out of its identity. That is also there. But then we have to ask ourselves, if there are certain aspects of a certain religion which are so depraved or which can shock the conscience of any reasonable, modern, secular person, then what do you do? Is the state expected to sit back and watch all that is happening? That's a simple question.
Okay, sure. Yes, Vinod Sharma.
No, I
you
want to
a
make
point.
2 points.
Yes.
Well, I out of great respect for the rule of law and the Supreme Court's jurisdiction in matters where human rights are involved. But if you remember that we have in this country a law prohibiting dowry,
Yes.
but the same law permits gifts by parents to the daughter.
3 then.
Why is it? Because any law has to be acceptable to the people for whom it has been formulated. Here is a question, rightly or wrongly, of belief. Here is a question, rightly or wrongly, of a bad tradition, of a bad practice which has been followed over the years, you know. So, if the Supreme Court makes an attempt to take the community on board while correcting the wrong, which is sustainable, correction which is sustainable, then I think the Supreme Court in its wisdom will take the call. For instance, recently there was a statement by an organization which is related to the RSS, which said that Sanskar Bharti said that we would like to redo the Manusmriti. We would like to redo the Manusmriti. They have their own reasons for redoing the Manusmriti. Manusmriti, in its form that exists today, there is a huge debate that, you know, it was changed ever since the original text was written. Our constitution, it was changed, you know. I mean, it's being argued by some people. But in Manusmriti, there is a practice of untouchability, which is a criminal offense today. Criminal offense today. So I think that societies evolve and that evolution should be encouraged. And no evolution happens under the threat, on the threat of a gun or under the threat of a law. A law should be so formulated that it meets the requirements of the Constitution, the rights of the people, and also the level of acceptability which is required for it to be a success. So I won't take the position which my learned friend is taking, though I respect his point of view, that that should be the ideal case actually. But I think that in our kinds of societies which are so variegated, that it may look like an utopian dream, you know.
Yes. Okay. Satya Prakash, you wanted to make a point.
Untouchability was not, it was declared unconstitutional in one go. We did not allow the society to evolve and then undo. It was declared unconstitutional in one go. And here, every now and then, we are hearing that it has been going on for 1400 years. Question is not 1400 years. The real question is, what is happening since 1950, January 26, 1950.
Correct.
We are all, I belong to a constitutional generation. Those born after the constitution came into being, they have slightly different way of thinking. Look at the irony. The same constitution which guarantees a separate set of rights to the minorities, and rather which are additional rights to minorities, all these people, Muslim Personal Law Board or Jamiyat people, they will latch on to that. These are our rights. Nobody should touch it. And the Constitution has guaranteed to them, and these are additional rights, more than what a member of the majority community. But here is a case, it is not about a particular community. Constitutional rights, and particularly Part 3, 14, right to equality, non-discrimination, or right to live with dignity, these rights have not been given to communities.
Right.
These rights have been given to individuals. So even if there is one member of our nation, one citizen whose rights are being violated, he or she has a right to go to the Supreme Court and claim that right. And those rights are against the state. Here the problem is there are two ways. One way, and which the Supreme Court has been taking thus far, is that you decide whether a particular practice is part of essential practice of a particular religion or not. If it is so, generally they will not touch that.
Sure.
That has been the second is, and that question has arisen now. Second, even if it is essential part of that practice, can you allow that practice to violate some other member of the same community, their fundamental rights to be violated? Here, The question is, half the Muslim population is affected. There is it's a kind of Damascus sword hanging on Muslim women.
I'm running out of
that
time.
They can be
I've got very little time on the program. I'm going to come back to you for a final comment. But before that, let me go to Justice Khan, who's still with us on the phone line. Justice Khan, what's the way forward, really?
Frank, I disagree with one of the learned panelists. He feels that Article 21 is the end of the whole thing. After all, it is a constitution is made by the parliament, by a constituent assembly, and there is something which is arising out of a religious scripture. That's why I had emphasized that please maintain a distinction between the triple talaq as formulated in Quran, which gives you time gaps for reconciliation, as we have in our laws made by the parliament. For example, in case of a divorce by a mutual consent, you give a time gap. Now, those time gaps are given in that formulation. What is Supreme Court going to strike down? Is it not protected by Article 25 that this is my fear, this is arising out of Quran. Quran is the God's word. Article 21 is the man-made provision. Therefore, allow me, it is protected by Article 25. Right. Allow me that, what? The Quranic formulation, not the misuse.
Okay,
498A is being misused. Does that mean that you go and scrap it?
Justice
So
Khan,
many laws are being misused.
right.
What does that mean?
Your point is taken. I'm sorry to cut you short, though, because I'm running out of time, so I'd like to get comments from everyone here as well. Jai Sai Deepak, did the Supreme Court lose an opportunity somewhere in putting this whole debate of personal laws versus fundamental rights to rest as far as this case is concerned?
See, for me, that's a premature question until we see what exactly comes out in the judgment, and we'll have to take a look at it. I just hope that the Supreme Court takes a clear position on this issue, because that's fundamental to the issue of triple talaq. Triple talaq is only the outward symptom. This is the primary issue as far as I'm concerned, because the decision that the Supreme Court takes and the ratio of that particular decision will have a bearing on a lot of existing practices in every community across the board. There is no doubt about it. And therefore, for me, this is going to be landmark in that sense. I hope the Supreme Court does not pull any punches when it comes to addressing this particular issue, because this is very, very important. It can open the floodgates for a lot of things. It is going to have a bearing on the Sabarimala case as well.
Right. Vinod Sharma, your closing concluding remarks.
Two things. One, that untouchability was removed in one stroke. Has it been removed? The question is that. Has it been removed? Aren't there a number of cases still registered under the Harijans Act, Or isn't there still discrimination in this society? Similarly, when the Constitution was made, on the basis of caste, classes were determined in two cases. In the case of the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes. Isn't that being questioned today in this society? So what I am saying is, the essence of what I was saying was that let there be, all reforms are gradual. They can't be sudden.
Right.
It is not a surgical strike that you do on a community to carry out a reform. You have to encourage
time
people within.
to evolve is what you're
Yes,
saying.
of course. So thereby, I would say that the same kind of sensitivity should be shown by the courts as it was shown in the case of the dowry when
Completely
it was
out of
prohibited.
time. Completely out of time. Satya Prakash, quick closing comment.
Well, legislative and judicial push is a must. And when it comes to court, somebody goes to the court for protection of fundamental rights, hands-off approach will be the worst approach the Supreme Court can take.
Correct.
Here, the Muslim women have gone to the court. They have nowhere else to go.
Right.
And that is why they have gone to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court turns them away, that will be the worst day in the constitutional history.
No question of turning them away. It's the question of addressing their grievance within the ambit of acceptability, maximum acceptability.
Constitutional acceptability.
Okay, fine. Fair enough. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Jai Sai Deepak, Satya Prakash and Justice Khan, thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. See you again next time.